Well, thank you all for being here. I would like to introduce Alexandra Crapanzano is a James Beard Award-winning writer and dessert columnist for the Wall Street Journal. She is the author of the London Cookbook and Eat, Cook LA, and her work has been widely anthologized, most noticeably in Best American Food Writing. She has been a frequent contributor to Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Food 52, Savour, Town and Country, Elle, The Daily Beast, Departures, Travel and Leisure, and the New York Times Magazine. She has years of experience in the film world, consults in food spaces, and serves on several boards with focus on sustainability. Alexandra grew up in New York and Paris, received her BA from Harvard and her MFA from NYU, where she has also taught writing. She is married to the writer John Burnham Schwartz, and they live in New York with their son Garrick and their Bouvier de Flandres, Griffin. Stephen, can you turn off the music? Because all of a sudden I realized we were competing with the soundtrack of when the store was open. With us, we have Rob and Kathleen Stowell. So there are in-person folks for today. I have numbers of questions, but as I said before, if you have questions, please, chime in or raise a hand or do whatever. Lauren also baked. What did you bake?
I made the olive oil cake.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I can't remember I'm gonna butcher the French, so it's the olive oil cake. It's on page, I think, 92 or something.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do is ask a few questions, and then feel free, if you've baked from the book, to please ask questions about the baking. Like if you had any problems. I mean, I have a couple questions about my recipe in general, just because I used an odd shaped pan and it may have come out a little drier than we'd hoped. But Alexandra, thank you for being here with us. I know you're in a car, and I know that the reason you're not here with us in person either last week or this week is because of bronchitis. So we appreciate you not coming and sharing your cooties with us.
Thank you. Yes, and forgive me in advance if I'm coughing.
Oh, no, please, please. I appreciate you taking the time, even though, it may be a little tougher. And I also would like to mention that you're in a car. So the effort is I'm very grateful for. So I do have a question. Where did the idea of this book originate?
I love that question. It originated in the early days of the pandemic when my family and I, we were cooped up in a small house in the northwestern corner of Connecticut. And I'm not a French citizen, but France has obviously been a huge part of my life. And there was truly something about the borders being closed that drove me a little bit nuts. I knew of course why the borders were closed, but I felt for the first time that that I was being kind of severed from a place very dear to me, and a foreigner, even if I'm not at heart a foreigner. And I think also during the pandemic, I'm not sure if this was true for you as well, but there was such a desire to get out of thinking about the time and place that we were in, that I began to really think much more about my childhood. And I think in so many ways, this book was my attempt to write myself home to Paris, and also to really write myself home to a period of time when I was in a completely different world, of course, from the pandemic, when I was, when I was a kid and carefree, and was able through this book really to kind of to bake, to taste, to eat, and my way home to that. And also in a lot of ways, language. I ordered maybe 2 or 3 dozen French books on baking. And as I would read through them, the language would really be in my mind, and I loved that. So it was an extremely emotional project that I didn't necessarily know was going to be a book at this length at the time. It started, I will also say, when I realized I did have a book, I thought, you know what, this is going to be a little book. It's going to be a short pandemic. It'll be I will perfect 1 cake a day. It'll be maybe 70 pages. And I think it was around page 125 or cake 125 that I realized, no, this is actually Obviously not a pandemic that's going to end anytime soon, but also that there really hadn't been a book on this subject. And even the books I was getting from France, none of them were about home baking. They were all about patisserie, or they were desserts in general. But this was a side of French baking that I wanted the world to know about, because it is the most accessible. I think it's absolutely delicious, and it's just part of the culture. It's yeah,
Well, I even got I get Dory Greenspan's newsletter,
I
and
love that.
she absolutely shouted you out on one of your recipes. Which one was it again?
I think it was a cardamom rose cake, or it's a cardamom
Yes, it
cake,
was.
and she decorated it with beautiful rose petals. Dory
She
is
absolutely,
absolutely brilliant.
she is brilliant, but she absolutely loves your books, your book. I mean, she just, when I posted that I was going to be having you when we were originally discussing the baking event last week, she chimed in of, "Ooh, that's going to be a delicious day."
That's
I mean, it was
that's
really
I can
great.
hear her. I can hear her voice in that. I wrote to her actually when when I really had the idea for this book, and because to me she is the be all and end all of this, and I even though I had as strong, if not stronger, an affinity and time in France, but uh, I wrote to her and I said, kind of, is it okay if I do this? And she wrote back the most incredibly generous, fantastic, wonderful letter. So I got it in the middle of the night, and I wept, and I thought, okay, this is I've gotten a blessing, thank God.
Well, brava, I
But
mean,
she's
she was our first baking event.
extraordinarily generous.
She was our
Oh,
first
well,
baking event. We had the
impossible act
first,
to follow.
well, we had her, we had Erin McDowell, we've had Samantha Senavarantne, we've had a
Yeah,
number of people here. So Rose Berenbaum's been here twice because she begged to come back. So we have fun here.
I
So
know you do. I can't
we
wait to
do.
come. I'm definitely going to come in the spring,
Oh,
late
yes.
winter, spring,
Oh,
100%.
yes. Oh,
And
yes.
if I lose signal for a second or two, it's only because of the place I'm in, and it will come right back.
That's okay. And
Okay.
we'll just wait for you to come back because I'm so excited that you're coming back. So do you want me to talk to what's his name, Eric, and find out when you're free?
Oh no, you can email me directly. Much better.
You got it, girl.
Yeah.
Oh, very exciting. So for all of you that I'm mailing book plates to, hang on to your book plate in case you come in person, then you can get an in-person signature. So just know that. In the book, you speak of less sugar and vanilla in the US than in France. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, actually the reverse. Less sugar in France than in the US.
Did I say it
100%.
that way?
Oh no,
Anyway,
but
sorry.
that's but that's okay. Yes, no, that was one of the, how can I say this? There are recipes in this book that date back to the Middle Ages, and yet I feel that these cakes are incredibly contemporary. Particularly in America, they feel very contemporary, because I think, as a whole, we're heading in that direction where desserts are less sweet. You're not getting quite as much of that Twinkie style cake where you take a bite and the first thing you read is sugar. But the reason is actually a little bit more nuanced. Is that in France, whether it's savory food, savory cooking, or baking, the French are really looking to showcase a particular flavor and to create a balance around it, rather than necessarily have something read sweet. So I think about flavors, and when I talk about flavors, I'm really talking about reading a flavor. So when if you take a bite of a southern coconut cream pie, or a southern coconut layered cake, for example, right, you will taste coconut, but the first run you will have in your mouth is of super sweet. It's of sugar. And in France, when you take a bite of a cake, it is usually whatever that ingredient is that the cake is all about, whether that is orange or chocolate or hazelnut or, strawberry, or even a lavender or rose water, whatever it is. The idea behind French baking is very much that flavor is the first thing that you read. It is the first thing that you have a sensory experience of. And so when you are thinking about baking and creating that balance, you automatically take sugar off center stage and kind of put it a little bit to the side. And what you then get, of course, is you get a cake that is incredibly satisfying, not because of the sweetness, but because of the flavor. And I feel that in America, as we're becoming more and more conscious of, the damaging effects of sugar, we are also heading in that direction. I've noticed for years now that, that the particularly really good restaurants will have desserts that are, just almost not sweet sometimes. I mean, just very much on the, kind of right on that line between sweet and not sweet. And we'll be kind of accenting flavor instead.
One of the things I noticed, I mean, it really came home for me because I baked a pound cake for today. And I added the chocolate chips because I had many chips in the house and I had some nice ones. And I had baked a pound cake for a party for last night from the Moosewood cookbook. And it was very sweet after tasting I did a trial run on this one. They were quite different, even with the chocolate chips.
Yes.
This had far more flavor to it. The other one, I mean, although it was a real true pound cake, it was a pound of butter, a pound, it really was. And I grew up baking from that book. And they're delicious, but now that I've started baking from this one, it's subtler. They're subtler. The flavors are much more subtle.
Absolutely, they're subtler. And I think the other thing is that these are everyday treats, right? These are not, I think, the French do really like to have a little something sweet with every dessert, with every meal, at the end of every dinner, certainly. And in order to do that in a way, you can't go super, super sweet, can you? You're not going to make an enormously rich, sweet, icing filled cake and eat that every day. At least if you want to survive very long in life. So I think it is that sense of moderation, which is not to say that it's not indulgent, because it is indulgent, but the indulgence is more, it's more in actually having something sweet every day than it is having something that's over the top sweet every day. I was just going to say one other thing is, when you are baking at home and you don't have to think about decorating a cake, when you don't have to think about taking out a pastry bag or whipping up a buttercream or a special icing, but you can think of something as just a really simple one layer cake that is, not too sweet, satisfying, will last a couple of days, full of flavor. I think it allows for that casualness of just putting something together in 10 minutes and having it, and not having to fuss, not having to worry. Part of the reason I wanted this book to be illustrated is I didn't want people to see a picture of a perfect cake and feel like they had to emulate that or it would be a failure. I really wanted it to be much more relaxed.
Speak to those wonderful illustrations. They're so beautiful.
Thank you. I had a great illustrator who I found through a friend in Paris, and we did this obviously entirely by Zoom, and occasionally I would send her pictures. My one request was that she put our dog in one of the illustrations, and he is in that map and the introduction. But she was wonderful, and she did exactly what I was really looking for, which is illustrations that were not overtly feminine, because I didn't feel like that was right. I didn't want a book that looked like it was all in pink, so to speak, and also that it would give much more of a kind of casual, fanciful sense of things. There he is, so that people would feel liberated from having to make something a certain way and look a certain way, and also so they would just get a sense of a book that's meant to have a light touch in the way that the cooking is meant to have a light touch. But she was wonderful to work with. And I gave her free rein on the cover, so the cover actually does have fancy cakes on it. But yeah.
Is there gluten intolerance in France? I mean, is that a thing? My daughter, dated someone from France, and he said, I'm gluten intolerant, and I'm sort of not even considered French sometimes. Is it the source of their grains? Discuss flour. I don't
So
know.
it is a really interesting thing that Nathan Myhrvold, who you may know from his modernist cuisine books, and for anybody who doesn't know, he was actually the chief technology officer of Microsoft Word when it started, and
Wow.
of just Microsoft, sorry, not Microsoft Word, and he's an absolute genius, first of all, but he, you know, was at Microsoft, I think, in its first, maybe, I don't know how many years, 20 years, made buckets of money and decided he was going to pursue his true passion, which is cooking. And he wrote a 10-volume, I think it might be 8 volumes, book on bread that is absolutely extraordinary and incredibly scientific. And one of the things he told me is that the way that French wheat is produced means that a lot of Americans find that when they go to Paris, if they do have gluten insensitivity, they are still able to eat the bread in France. And this is not to say people who are truly have celiac disease or who have absolute gluten, are gluten intolerant, but people with a little bit of sensitivity often find that it is not an issue there. And I don't know what it is about the flour exactly, but there is a lot less gluten insensitivity, and I think there's a recognition of it. But what book was, instead of having a gluten-free chapter, I wanted to have a chapter of nut torts, which most of which are just gluten-free because they're meant to be gluten-free. They're meant to be based on nut flours instead of on wheat flour. And I think that tends to be the French approach. You almost never see a restaurant mention that something is gluten-free, but you do see a lot of nut torts, and you also see the dacquoise. The dacquoise are cakes that are made with layers of meringue and filled with either buttercream or creme chantilly or jam and fruit or whatever meets your fancy. And so when I have friends over who are gluten intolerant, I will tend to do either a nut tort or a dacquoise. But the flour question is a big one, because the flour that the French bake with generally is a little bit closer to cake flour than our flour. So there are definitely recipes in the book where I say, use an actual cake flour for this, because the crumb is so delicate, and the cake structure is different, and it's worth doing. For a lot of the cakes, though, particularly, any cake, for example, that has oil in it or yogurt or anything that's automatically going to give it a moist crumb, generally all purpose is fine. And I'm a huge fan of King Arthur, so that's what I tested with.
Yeah, and I use King Arthur's cake flour.
Yes, I did too.
It sounded, I tried to come up with, lots of, different flours, trying different things, seeing what they were. Where can one buy European butter?
So
You should talk about European butter.
it makes such a difference, and the reason is very simple. Is that European butter tends to be around 88 to 91% butter fat. American butter is about 81% butter fat. And if you reverse that equation, what you get is a higher percentage of water. So what is not butter fat in butter is water. What happens in that, obviously, is you're getting, first of all, you're getting less of that good fat that you do want in baking. But so many French recipes are based on browning butter and getting that incredibly good nutty taste that, when you brown butter, everybody says you smell hazelnuts, which I think is true. And if you are browning a European butter, which has less water, you get less evaporation and you get more butter. If you are browning an American butter, you're actually going to lose, a solid tablespoon out of, let's say 3/4 of a cup of butter. So there are times when I do call for it, and then times also when I just think that extra dimension of butter flavor and butter fat really does matter. Like the Breton butter cake, which is essentially a cake that just celebrates butter. Really, butter is the flavor.
Is the Irish butter considered European butter?
Yes. So Kerrygold.
I use that.
Yeah, Kerrygold is great. And there are a bunch of American butters that are now doing it. But I do, I do think I think it makes a difference, but it's not essential unless I specifically call for it. I find it pretty easy to get, but I am in New York, it's very easy to get. Up where I am in Connecticut, there's a, great market. I don't know if it's also near you in Connecticut, called La Bombs, that has it, and then Guido's has it. I like a brand called President. I like Plucre. I like there are a ton of them.
The Kerrygold is really what's available to us. We have Caroluzzi's, and they're an IGA that has the same
Yes.
chocolate that you look like,
The
Valrhona.
Valrhona.
Also, I get chocolate off of chocosphere.com.
Oh, I don't know that. I've got to look at that.
Chocosphere.com. I used to have a chocolate fountain at my Christmas parties, and that's where I got all the high-end chocolate pucks that I could use for
Oh my gosh, I want to
and then I'd make pound cakes
Oh,
and
that's
put out
great.
strawberries, and then that was dessert. So,
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Oh, what a fantastic idea.
well, it was a way to put chocolate on anything. So
Yes,
what we did.
I'm all for it.
But that's where you can get some really high-end chocolate. Also, if you can't find it locally, is chocosphere.com, because it's all kinds of European and chocolate from all over the world. So it's a great site. You ought to check it out.
Oh, and on the
Whoops.
note of there being less sugar, I will say also is, the tendency is to use a darker chocolate also, very much.
In France or in general?
In
Okay.
France, 100%. So kind of, 60 to 70% cacao, as opposed to our semi-sweet, which is, I think, 55.
I must say, I have started weighing recently, and I never used to do that. I used to measure rather than weigh. But now I'm finding, for instance, with the cake that I made today, this pound cake, when I weighed it to whatever the figure was, there was either 1 cup sugar or however many kilograms of sugar, there was slightly less when I
Yes.
weighed it.
Yes. And
And I was
what?
surprised.
I think nobody is ever going to spoon flour the same way into a cup, right? And so it does make a difference. But the other thing I love about using the scale in this is that if you have a scale that zeros, which almost all of them do, you really are only using one bowl. You're just, you're measuring one thing, and then you're resetting to 0, and then you add the next thing and you measure to that. And it cuts your mess in half, cuts the dishes in half, and you get a very precise measurement. The French, because their butter actually does tend to come in a specific amount of grams, they will often have everything else that works along those lines. So they will, the recipe will call for, say, 100 grams of butter, and then everything else will follow.
Well, I did bake, but I also know Lauren baked. And so does anybody have any baking questions or any questions of the author? Lauren, do you have any questions about what you were working on?
Yeah, so I have a question, not about what I made for today, but I made the limoncello raspberry tiramisu.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I made that a couple of times actually over the course of the last month or so, and it was delicious. But I was trying to figure out how in the first portion of that recipe, I'm not going to pronounce the name of what that's called, but it's like Zaba.
Zabiglione, yes.
Yes.
Or it's in French, it's a sabayon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how do I tell when I've gotten to the ribbon consistency that I calls for?
Okay, absolutely. So a ribbon consistency is when, if you hold up the beaters and you let some of the sabayon fall back on the batter, it will form a ribbon and it will not sink for 10 seconds. So it's definitely that, we call it just a 10-second mark, is you wait for it to, and then, after 10 seconds, it will dissipate and it will fall back in. But that is key. It's particularly key in the Genoise as well, where you really want to beat those eggs until they have almost quadrupled in volume.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. I've made macarons before, so I assume that was kind of what I was going for in the same sense of the
yes
term. So yeah.
But you liked it.
Yeah, we loved it. I made
Oh,
it.
good.
I made it once just to have for like my house for like a few days. It lasted about like 3 or 4 days, like 2 people eating it, and then I bought Thanksgiving dinner too.
Oh,
So
good. That's what I like
yeah.
to hear. And for anybody, who doesn't want to get limoncello, or who isn't drinking alcohol, what I discovered is that Nielsen Massey, the makers of the great vanilla, are now doing a lemon paste, which is almost it's
Really?
more liquid than paste, but it will give you that same flavor, that same hit of lemon, but without the alcohol and the needed bottle. And how do you like the olive oil cake?
It turned out really well. I ended up having to make some substitutions only because of the fact that when I went to the store to get like citrus, the store I went to was the fire alarm was going off and I couldn't actually get
I
it.
heard that.
Yeah. So I didn't have an orange, but I had an extra lemon, so I zested an extra lemon. Basically more of a lemon olive oil cake at this point.
Okay.
Consistency, it turned out great. Also didn't have milk. I used oat milk, and if I usually when I try to make like the original recipe, and then try to make a different variation of whatever I have on hand in those cases.
Yes.
But I had to kind of just go with what I had and had it. It's holding up okay, and it looked okay, and it's moist enough.
Well,
I have never had anybody approach a store on fire to bake. So I am touched and honored. I have no idea. Oat milk has a very different consistency.
Yeah.
But there is, by the way, there's an oat yogurt cake in the book. Not
Okay.
oat,
I noticed that.
which, because the French, I think, there these trends that are going around, particularly the oat milk one is actually, you can get oat milk in almost every place now in France. But it is a different flavor. It's a different heaviness.
Yeah, and I did use the extra creamy oat milk as well, so I wasn't sure if that was going to factor
Okay.
into it well usually. And I do try to, like I said, I usually when I bake these kinds of things, I usually will try to make it just with whatever it calls for, and then
Yes.
I use whatever I have on hand the next time and just see how it works. I've done that with like my grandfather who's diabetic and panics about all this sugar.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all that. So like usually they're like, he uses the sugar, and I'm like, okay, if I'll usually cut down and see how that changes things.
Yep. Oh, well, then this is actually a good book for that, because there is less sugar.
Yeah.
I am all for the idea that you should be entirely flexible in what you can add. It usually is, it's usually those first essential things that are really key, kind of the size of the eggs, the amount of the flour, and then the amount of fat. And then the sugar really can go up and down as long as it's not powdered sugar. So powdered sugar has a different purpose in baking than granulated, in that it affects consistency more, and actually can absorb more liquid. So that's the only time I really wouldn't play with amounts of sugar. But I will often, and obviously, you don't want to go from a granulated to a dark brown without making some quick changes. But this book it's just meant to say, hey, the store's on fire. I had to go with 2 lemons instead of an orange and a lemon, and without trouble. That is just an incredible story. I hope everybody was okay.
I'm sure everything is. I have to go grocery shopping now after this. I'm also like, I'm running out of flour and still have to bake for Christmas Eve and things like that. So
right.
Yeah. So I've got to go pick up all my essentials as well. But I was like, I'm determined to make something from this book. And I actually
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I actually had plans to make I was gonna make the spice cake, but then I realized I'm in a situation too where I've had my pantry hasn't changed in like a year. And then suddenly my parents moved out, and they took some of the things I used to bake, like almond flour and cake flour, all the time.
Yes.
And I was looking for cake flour to make that recipe, and I didn't have cake flour. So I was on the phone. I was like, "Hey, do you have the cake flour?" And they're like, "No, we don't." They just found it this morning.
Oh wow. Okay.
People to make that. So that's the next thing on the list I'm going to try and make.
Okay. Good.
You okay?
Yes, I'm okay.
Beth's got her hand up. You have a question, Beth?
Actually, I have 2. One is back to the olive oil. cake. I always think of olive oil cakes. I thought of them as Italian cakes, and I'm wondering if
Oh, I'm sorry.
different types, when you go to get olive oil, you've got Italian, you've got Greek, Spanish olive oil. What do you recommend?
Great question. So this is definitely a cake that is from the kind of the Niçoise area down in the south on the Mediterranean, where there actually are a lot of olive trees and really delicious, very buttery olive oil. What you need for that recipe is an olive oil that does not look too green and is not too herbaceous, but definitely skews on the buttery, sweeter side. And interestingly enough, that tends to not mean the most expensive, but the reverse. So when you look at the super expensive olive oils, those tend to be they tend to be on the greener side, because that's what people like for dipping bread into or drizzling on something. They want that herbally, slightly almost astringent addition. But for baking, you can actually go much cheaper. And if there are details about the olive oil, you're looking for something that says it's buttery or sweet or almondy.
Great, thank you. I actually, after I bought the book, I looked through it, decided to give it as a gift to my daughters. But what struck me was the way you had categorized it, the organization of the book. And I thought it must have been fascinating, of all the sweets, cakes and options, the thought process, that how you came up with the categories. Were they traditional French categories, or did you group some of your own, make some of your own groupings?
I grouped them entirely according to what I wanted to do, which was, I will say, obviously, it does go, certainly the first chapter is meant to be the really easy one, right? But it's also it is very much meant to be the kinds of things that you bake when you're young, as a child, and those true back pocket recipes. And then, of course, moving on, the savory chapter and the holiday chapter, the Bûche de Noël, are a little bit more complex. But certainly, the regional ones are very important. I wanted something where if you have a lot of fruit, you're going to go to fruit. I wanted a chapter on chocolate, because the French are really, really dote on chocolate and love chocolate, and so do I. And then the one that I think is kind of the chic and fanciful was almost my version of a kind of miscellaneous, since here's all the good stuff that I can't figure out what to do with, and let me put it all in here. But those are also, French cooking is pretty regional. So I did, when you're talking about food in Paris, you get food from every region. Okay. And so it opens up the possibility a little bit more.
I like the organization.
I didn't have a loaf pan, and I ended up picking these recipes that called for a regular standard bread loaf pan. And so I either had the smaller loaf pan or the one I'd gotten from King Arthur, which is the long and thin one that I baked here. But it must have had a completely different consistency in a conventional loaf pan, because I made the honey cake, the honey loaf. I have the advanced reader's copy, and it has no page numbers, so I can't.
Oh no, of course. And actually, you also have the uncorrected version then.
Were the recipes okay?
I think
I'm gonna get a book before you come, so you can sign a real book.
Okay,
but I've been using this one because I dribble all over everything. Of
course. No, I think usually that final copy edit, if I'm not mistaken, the final copy edit usually is after the ARC. So that's but I'm happy to check. It will change. Yes, the shape. So in those great long pans, which are in fact what the French use, the timing, of course, is much shorter, though, because you're getting, you don't have as thick of a cake. Is the temperature less also? The temperature should be a little, depending on what that pan is made of. So ceramic. Yes. So I think in the beginning of the book, I call for kind of those USA pans I love, but a kind of nice thick not dark, but pale aluminum, but kind of thick grade, 9x5. So the chances are, if you cooked in a longer, thinner pan, that's ceramic also, which distributes heat differently, that you could have overcooked it a little bit.
I did with
Yeah.
the honey loaf very much so.
Okay, yeah.
I also, with this one, I dropped my temperature. Now my oven's a little sketchy because it's
Mhm.
not a great oven. And I dropped the temperature by 15 degrees and cooked it about 5 to 8 minutes less. And it seemed to be okay, but I think it's still a little dry because it's so thin. I mean, I think I need to get the American pan, the regular
Uh,
loaf pan, to have it have the moisture hold a little better.
I think so too. And just to protect it. Yeah, I would agree with that. But there is a recipe that actually does call for the long pan and really does have to be made in the long pan, which is the first chocolate cake, the Pierre Hermé chocolate cake. And because that is essentially a molten cake in a loaf shape, it needs very little cooking. It does have to be in the pan that you do have, that long French pan from Williams Sonoma. So that's perfect.
Oh, no, I guess I'll have to try it.
You will have to try it. I am gonna have to get off in just a
Yes.
couple minutes because
And-
to put the car in the garage.
Well, Alexandra,
you.
I'm gonna let you go because I think you've been more than generous with your
Thank
time
you.
and
Oh,
not
my
feeling
pleasure.
well. I just, my heart goes out to you. I hope you feel better. I know we've
Thank
probably
you.
driven your voice away.
No, no,
Um,
I'm happy. So happy you love the book and so happy to do this. And so sorry I couldn't make it, but really, really
Not a
looking
problem.
forward. You have a great bookstore and and I am in full support. So
Well, thank you,
be
my
my
dear,
pleasure.
and I will get a hold of you after the holidays. We'll work on something in March or April. Let's just see what works
That
for you.
would be great.
All
Thank
right,
you.
well, take care and have a wonderful holiday.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks. You know where we are. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope you all have a great holiday, and thanks for joining in.
Thank you.
I hope it was okay. We had an awful lot of people that couldn't come at the last minute. It was an imperfect solution. But she not only had bronchitis, but she has pneumonia now.
Oh,
And she did this in a commute from her car, which is why you didn't see her. So she was incredibly gracious in the green
Yeah.
room before I let the two of you in. And she is just thoughtful and she's fully supportive. And yes, of course, she'll come back. And that's huge for us because, she's a James Beard Award winning big time person.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. What I'm going to do, they're sending me 50 book plates. And I'm going to send them out to everybody or make sure everybody gets one and tell them to hold on to it. So in case they can come to the event that we reschedule, they can get a regular signature. Is that fair enough? All right.
Yeah.
All right. If you celebrate
you.
Christmas, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you around soon.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.